Hello and welcome to the Parenting Unmasked podcast. I'm Kimberly Cox. I'm going to be your host, and I am so excited. Whether you are listening to this on a podcast platform or watching this on YouTube, I am ridiculously excited that you are here, okay? So, in this first episode, I wanted to take a minute and just talk about my vision behind the Parenting Unmasked podcast. This goes hand in hand with the Unmasked Parent podcast, which we will be doing. The Parenting Unmasked podcast will be Mondays, and the Unmasked Parenting podcast will be on Wednesdays, all right? I believe that keeping these separate is going to be what's going to be best for the overall ability for you guys to get out of this what you want, okay? So I guess you would call that the user experience, if you will. I am a ADHD, late diagnosed ADHD mom who at times considers herself ADHD. I was never officially diagnosed with autism. However, there's a lot of things that resonate in both ways. So I consider myself ADHD, but I'm officially ADHD. And I think over the years, from being late diagnosed, I was diagnosed when I was 35. So over the years of not being diagnosed and living life in a world that just purely felt like it was not meant for me, like somehow everybody else got a rule book and my rule book was written in some other language or had different rules or something. It just never made sense. So my goal over all of this is to help families, okay? Because we know the chances are if there's a child in the house that has ADHD, autism, any neurodivergent conditions, there are chances that the adults in the house, the parents, the mother, the father, siblings have similar disorders. They are hereditary. I know there's a lot of talk about different things, and some people are saying, oh, it's vaccines, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. This is my thought on a lot of that, okay? And this is, I think, the purest way that I can bring it to you. Are there traumatic brain injuries and things like that that can cause things that look a lot like autism, that look a lot like different things, right? Yes. Like strep causes this thing that we know now is called PANDAS, PANDAS. And that can mimic very much autistic tendencies and stuff. So when we look at neurodivergence as a whole, my personal feeling and the way that this podcast and the neurocircus works is not the way that most neurodivergent people, experts, I guess I'll put it that way, the way that they think of things. They think of neurodivergence as you were born with a difference in your brain that causes things developmentally to be different. Your brain is wired differently. Now, we also know that the brain can be wired differently due to stress, due to trauma, due to a lot of different things. It can rewire your brain. So not necessarily that your brain was born wired differently, but through trauma and other experiences, your brain has become rewired. I'm trying to get this headphone situation going. There we go. Therefore, because of that, I tend to look at neurodivergence as all of those. Because if your brain is now wired differently, whether you were born that way or whether it became that way, you are still working with a different brain at this point. So I tend to put all of my resources out there, and I don't look at people and go, oh, you're not allowed to have it and you're not allowed to have it. You can't consider yourself for this. It's not how this works, okay? Anybody whose brain is wired differently, that resonates with this stuff, that can take it and go, that sounds like a good idea. Grab it and let's go, okay? That's my first piece of advice for you. Whether that is your kids needing some help, you needing some help, even other members of your family, because sometimes we have a husband or a wife that is not diagnosed, but if we ourselves are diagnosed and then we start to see it, we start to look at our kids, we start to look at our spouse or our significant other, and we start to see this, okay, I see it there, I see it there, I see it there. And if we can give people, I think of accommodation as a gift, okay? I'm giving you the gift of being able to accommodate your family. Because when you feel empowered to accommodate, your family's gonna benefit, you're gonna benefit, everyone is going to just light up and shine in the way that they're meant to deep down inside, okay? And that is my sole goal for everybody. I feel like everybody on this planet is here for a reason. Everybody has their own gifts and their own things that they bring to the table. But a lot of times life just sucks that out of us, especially if we are neurodivergent, but we're not diagnosed that way. When we get a diagnosis or we self-diagnose, we start to identify with those things, we start to see, okay, we're not necessarily the problem, right? But all growing up throughout my life, it was, you're too much, you talk too much, you're too quiet, you aren't participating enough, you're being too much, like always too. And that gets to a point, especially in young kids and young adults, where they just start to shut down because at least if I'm nothing, I can't be too much of anything, right? Because eventually you're gonna just forget that I even exist. I'm just gonna be able to live my life and be in the shadows. No one's gonna notice that I'm there and it's all good. And I feel like deep down inside, that is what a lot of our kids are going through in public schools, even homeschooled, but on the streets playing with their friends and stuff in the neighborhoods. It's ridiculous how much weight we put on everyone being the same and trying to fit into that thing, when really each and every one of us were born to stand out. Right? We were born to shine in our own way. We were born to do our own things and have our own interests and our own loves and our own passions. And yet we somehow get pushed into this funnel of what society or parents or school or friends or whatever want us to do. And it's so difficult. So I wanted to take a few minutes, like I said, and just talk to you guys from the bottom of my heart why I think this is so important. So this podcast, which is the Parenting Unmasked podcast, this is about parenting your kids, okay? This is going to be for your kids. This is going to be help for your kids. It's going to be help for the whole family in a lot of ways, okay? A lot of times we're going to talk about things that are going to be structures to put in place for the whole family. But at the end of the day, the reason we're doing this is to give your kids some structure, some stability, give you a place to go, okay, this is an avenue to try for a while and see if it works. Other people have said it works. Let's try it. Let's see. We don't really have anything to lose. I'm going to give you a disclaimer right here, okay? I'm going to clap so I see this because I want to put something on the screen for those of you watching. I know trial and error can be hard, okay? Especially when you're a parent, when you have other people turning to you and looking to you for answers as to why your children are the way that they are, why you are the way you are sometimes, why it seems like everything just snowballs and you don't know how to fix it, right? I say that in air quotes if you're listening and not watching this, like, we are not supposed to fix it, okay? That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to learn to work with it. It's our superpower when we harness it and work with it the right way. It can also be our worst enemy if we're trying to run an Apple brain system on a PC, right? We're trying to run Apple apps on a PC or PC apps on an Apple. It doesn't work that way. Everything has to be like programmed differently. And I think that is the best analogy I've ever heard in my life. Because one, we all know that there's like a big divide. There are people who are diehard Apple fans, and there are people who are diehard Android fans. And there are people who like just will not cross over, will not whatever. And yet there's lots of times when there's even certain apps that you can only get on one or the other because they haven't made them for the other one. And this is how a lot of our brains are, okay? And I always feel like people are gonna look at me like I'm not bad, but like I'm like being favoritistic or something like that. Is that even a word? Favoritistic. I like that. Maybe we'll have to, yeah. But like picking favorites, right? Because I often refer to neurodivergent brains as the Apple operating system. But there's a reason I do that, okay? PCs are common. They're pretty much everybody has a PC. PCs are in schools. PCs are in businesses. Like the PC is the general normal thing. Everybody runs Windows. Everybody does that kind of stuff. If you have an Apple, it's once you have an Apple, a MacBook, an iPhone, whatever, you're automatically, I don't want to say put in another league, but you are. They're more expensive. They're often looked at as being like pricier, and like most people are like, feel like you have to be successful to have stuff like that because it's more expensive, right? Whereas some of us we choose to invest. If I'm going to spend so much money on a laptop that is a PC, I can save a little extra and get the nicer one that I want. And it's again, logically, it's not that way. But figuratively, when we think about it that way, Apple is more expensive. It brings a pricier, classier feeling. And I feel like our neurodivergent brains, okay, are looked at as too much a lot of times. Over the top. We have grandiose ideas. We are just, there's a lot of people that feel that way, right? And that's because they're used to PC thinking. They're used to this idea of everybody thinks the same, and this is what's common, and this is what's considered normal. They're not used to people having these ideas that are bigger, that are above everything, that don't make sense in the PC world necessarily. And that's one of the reasons why I feel deep down inside the neurodivergent brain is very much like Apple, because we always are thinking, we're always innovating, we're always trying to make things better, I feel like. And I feel like a lot of people don't like that. And the reason they don't like that is because they don't want to have to continue to grow with your growth. Okay? So those are some things that I'm going to say in the beginning. I want to make a side note here and say, whatever you've been through, if you are a neurodivergent parent, if your significant other is neurodivergent, even if you aren't necessarily neurodivergent yourself, and you don't necessarily identify that way, but your significant other does, have a conversation with them. Ask them about some of the stuff, because as a child, it is a very different story. And we can have wildly successful kiddos when they are set up to succeed, when scaffoldings are put in place, when we have all of the things in place to help them achieve what they want to achieve. Or they can be wildly unsuccessful. They can feel like failures everywhere that they turn. And I know as parents, none of us want that feeling, okay? None of us want our kids to feel like they're failing. Sometimes we even move the bar down lower because we feel like we have to, so that they feel like they can get quick wins. I've done that. I've been guilty myself of doing stuff like that. And I think one of the things that I want to do in this podcast is help us to not have to lower that bar too much, right? We can leave the bar where it's at and we can just build. We can build scaffoldings. We can build ways to help our kids that have nothing to do with lowering the bar, that have nothing to do with saying, oh, you don't have to meet this, you can just come down here a couple notches. We can help lift them up. And as we're lifting them up and they're getting their footing and they're finding their handholds and stuff, they can climb that mountain, okay? They can. I'm gonna give you the brief rundown of my introduction to neurodivergence, if you will. I started seeing someone who was diagnosed with ADHD, and I could tell it was definitely there, but it wasn't something that I would have said was an extreme problem at the time. And obviously when you start dating somebody, there's that whole everybody's on their best behavior kind of thing. So that was, I'm sure, part of it and whatever. So as years went on, yes, I started to notice it more and more. There were different things. There were other comorbid conditions that came up and made things more difficult between my husband and myself. When we had our first child, and I knew there was this part of me that just knew, like, my kids were going to be different. I didn't know how, I didn't know what. Autism was in my mind, but it wasn't like a definite, right? So as my daughter started to grow up and things were just different, she had a lot of sensory issues, a lot of things where she would just flip out over normal stuff. Like most babies, like taking baths and playing in the water. She hated it, like absolutely hated being wet. Didn't really like swimming in a swimming pool unless like she was with somebody and they were bouncing her around and whatever. And then as soon as she got out, it was dry off, get in, clean, dry clothes. Like she did not like being wet. There were a lot of little things like that were just by themselves would have been no big deal, right? Mixed together with a bunch of other stuff, it becomes this very difficult area to navigate. And I got pregnant with her sister when she was about 9 months old. And I was exhausted like all the time and trying to keep up with her. And we got to a point where we decided this is not normal. This is not normal at all. Yeah. So fast forward, tried to get her into some early intervention, and that backfired the first go around. And then a few months later, we tried again and finally got her into speech, and they went ahead and put her in for occupational as well. And the occupational therapist, she's one of my favorite people in the entire world. I love her to death. I don't even think she realizes how much she's changed my life. Like just talking to her, it's been a little more than a handful of times. I think we saw her for about 5 or 6 months every week. And then she got a promotion, moved up in the company, and we had somebody else take over. And just having this woman in our lives to bounce ideas off of, to say, look, am I crazy? It was amazing, okay? So that's the first thing I want to tell you guys. If you guys are suspecting stuff, definitely look into some type of therapy, okay? Because even if you're not gonna go fully into the therapy thing and do everything that they say, it's good to have people that know their stuff that you can bounce ideas off of, okay? So that was number one. Then as we got further along, she was, yeah, there's a pretty good chance she's going to be ADHD. And I can't say that right now because she's young and there's a lot that still needs to be looked into and thought about, but there's a good chance. And it's definitely something that you should keep in mind. Fast forwarding, she was about 4 when she got her ADHD diagnosis. And it was her official one through the mental health facility in the area. And as I'm checking off all of the questionnaires that they give you, I could check off almost every single one for myself. And then I read the part where it talks about these have to be consistent throughout your childhood, like adult life as well, if these are still present and they've been present your whole life. And I was like, then I started to think back in my life, and I was like, wait a minute, I did that, and I did that, and I did that, and I felt this way, and I had this problem, and it clicked. Like everything clicked in such a deep, gratifying, and amazing way. It was like this, okay, I get it now. So my own diagnosis kind of gave me a hyper focus, if you will, to dive into. It gave me that interest to dive into this even more, right? More than how to help my kid. More, what is this? Why is this here? What is it doing, and how do we help it? And so as I started to dive into things, I started to realize like just how much like our brains are wired differently for reasons. Most of us have very big goals, very big dreams. We are not small thinkers by any stretch of the imagination. And so when we get that chance to just jump in and think about it from like a space of anything's possible, where the world tries to put limits on us and tries to, this'll never work and that'll never work. And you know what? There's lots of things that we would not have right now if those people would have listened to someone saying, that will never work. So I want to leave that part with you for a moment here. There's reasons, and nobody has goals and dreams and all that for nothing, okay? All right, moving forward. One of the, I don't know if I'll call it the best, but one of the big things that I hope to help families achieve through this is finding their sense of family culture. Because I feel that when you find family culture, okay, and a culture is by definition just a set of rules and beliefs that you live by, right? So when you find those rules and beliefs that everybody in the house can get behind, that is when everybody starts to feel like they're a part of something instead of like they're forced to be a part of something. When the things that I want are maybe not the same as what my kids want, but when the things that I want help my kids achieve what they want, and the things that my kids want to achieve help them and each other to achieve those things, when they can all work together and we can be one sort of cohesive unit, if you will. We all have our own interests, we all have our own things, we all need our own alone time. Like no one is saying that you don't need alone time. No one is saying you don't have a right to your own life and your own thoughts and your own passions and stuff. When we can find that common denominator between all of them, right? And that comes in the form of values, okay? When my values and your values connect and help each other, we have values that go across the board, okay? Everybody values honesty. Everyone values having fun. Everyone values feeling safe and secure. There are other values that we each have that we hold that are different. And so when we can connect on our similar ones, on the ones that are all the same, and then we can bring to the table our special values and assist people across from us that may not have that same value, right? So one of my values deep down inside has always been adventure. I love to go and do and see things and just like, I like my comfort zone, but I like being out of it too. I enjoy when I finally get to be out of it and I like allow myself to go out of it. I love it because it wakes me up. I feel alive. And there are some people who are just so scared to be out of their comfort zone, so scared, hardly can breathe when they're outside of their comfort zone. And so when we have that point in us where we're like, no, let's go do this adventure. And there's other people who don't want to, like maybe they want to have these experiences. They want to be able to say they did that, but that's not one of their highest values. That's not something that is going to force them to do something, right? They're gonna be just as happy staying in their little comfort zone. But when I say, hey, come on, let's go do this thing, all of a sudden, that sense of whatever it may be, maybe it's friendship, maybe it's that sense of curiosity, maybe it might even be the wanting to fit in, right? There can be good peer pressure too, all right? Like that can happen. Helps to pull that person out of their comfort zone, okay? And so there's lots of ways that we can do this, right? Think about the couple that is the one is the neat one and one is the messy one. And in the end, the neat one is helping the messy one kind of get their stuff in order and make it better. But the messy one is helping the neat one to not have to feel so stressed out and so uptight and everything has to be perfect. Gives them a little bit of freedom, a little bit of relaxation, a little bit of, I can let my guard down a little bit and things don't have to be perfect. You can help each other that way. And I find that when we start to play into that part with our family as a unit, as a whole, then all of a sudden, especially in our kids, we start to see our kids get excited because, wait a minute, that's one of my values that I'm good with. So if I can help this, my brother, my sister, whatever, to come out of their shell or do something that they're having trouble with, everybody feels good when they help people, right? And so that's part of what doing this, bringing this all together does. And we have to do it in a respectful way. We have to respect the sensory issues, the overstimulation or understimulation that sometimes happens, right? If we are overstimulated, we're going to have a hard time functioning. If we're understimulated, we're going to have a hard time functioning normally, right? Like we're going to be dragging and we're going to have a hard time doing things. And so a lot of stuff stems from, one, a morning and an evening routine that keep things rolling, where everybody knows what they're supposed to do, everybody does what they're supposed to do, so that we're able to have the rest that we need, we're able to have the food and the downtime and all of that we need, because we're not stuck putting out fires all day long, because we have this stuff that we need to get done in specific times. And I think that's something where, okay, so for myself, I was always against routines, always against schedules. The need for spontaneity in life overwhelmed any sense of a schedule. And so what became the schedule was no schedule. What became the routine, where I had to have this strict routine, was no routine. And I actually started to train my kids that way when they were little, because I had such a hard time with it that it became the norm not to do it. And I'm going to touch on this in the other podcast a lot more, because there is a place where we have to be on our own game in order for our family to flourish and do the best that they can. And that's hard for a lot of people, because a lot of people are like, oh, we're supposed to put our kids first. We're supposed to put our family first. And to some degree, your children they didn't have say in coming here. They are dependent on you until a certain age, at least, to feed them and take care of them and make sure they're safe and all of that. And so that is a thing where, as neurodivergence, and that's something we're going to dive into in the other podcast, how do we keep ourselves in check? How do we help ourselves so that then we have the energy, the strength, the spoons, in air quotes here, if you will, to make life easier, better, faster, more fun for our family? Those are some huge points. And we're going to take from that podcast and help ourselves. And then we're going to take what we learn in that podcast and I'm going to transform it in this one for how we help our kids and our family that way. If you yourself are not neurodivergent, I'm going to try really hard. It's going to be difficult. And if I ever get a little ahead of myself or I'm not explaining myself completely, I want you guys to let me know if you are confused about stuff, because coming from a neurodivergent brain, I have to kind of sometimes double think on how a neurotypical brain would process this or how I could explain it best to someone who is neurotypical. The reason I wanted to separate these is because originally my thought was we do the parent one, the one for the parent first, because that is the basis. If you are a neurodivergent parent, you will want to listen to Wednesdays and Mondays. Listen to Mondays, go listen to Wednesdays, and maybe come back and listen to Mondays again. I wanted to put the kids first because I just didn't want, whether or not this is a thing, right? I didn't want for people to be like, oh, of course you put the parent one first and you didn't put your kids first and all that, because a lot of times as neurodivergents, that's what we hear. We hear that we're selfish. We hear that we have too many passions and too many goals and we do too much for ourselves and we don't give up enough for our family, okay? But the truth is, nobody, and I'm going to say this again very slowly, nobody is supposed to give themselves up for their family. No one is supposed to give themselves up for their family. You still have to have yourself. You still have to have your own goals, your own dreams, your own ambitions. You have to be full. You cannot pour from an empty cup. I've said this before. I will say it again in this podcast. As parents, a lot of times we pour so much from an empty cup that we have a dry, empty styrofoam cup to pour from. And instead of filling ourselves back up, because that feels selfish, we instead take and rip little pieces of our cup off to give to people like that. And what we're doing is we're damaging our ability to fill ourselves up, our capacity to fill up, right? Because when we fill up a great big, think of a large, like an extra large styrofoam or paper cup from a fast food place, and think about, okay, you're gonna pour something for everybody in your family. Maybe you take a drink yourself, and now you're gonna pour some more. And then at a certain point, you're gonna have nothing left. But your kids are gonna be like, they still have a cup. Give me the cup. I want more. Your family's gonna be like, I need more. I don't care if you don't have any more. I need more. And so then you start to rip pieces off of that cup and hand those out. And your cup that was 32 ounces or whatever becomes 24, and then 20, and then 12, and then 8, and then 4, and then non-existent. And at that non-existent point, we've done hit burnout completely, and we are unable to give at all. It's important to keep our cups intact. It's important to keep something in there for ourselves. And it's even better if we can pour from the overflow, right? As it's pouring in, we can pour a little bit out and then tip it back up and fill it back and then do the same. And we can keep doing that. And that is why passions are so important. That is why, and if I don't get any other points across to you this podcast, let me leave you. I'm going to end this here in a minute. Let me leave you with this one point on this podcast. If you're not doing it for yourself, I want you to think of what your children are seeing you do and how you are becoming an example to them of what to do when they get older. Okay? Because I think a lot of times we still live in this feeling that we are being selfish, that we are being horrible, that we need to not be this way, right? That we need to give. And if we're truly good parents, we'll just want to give and keep giving. And giving is a good thing. It's not that giving is a bad thing, okay? But if we're teaching them that all they're supposed to do is give, they're going to end up in a relationship. They're going to end up married in a relationship where they are constantly giving to their significant other and their kids, and they're not taking anything for themselves. And as tired as you are, and as frustrated and worn out at times as you feel, your kids are going to have to go through that because they watched you do it and they think that's what they're supposed to do. Because you watched it and that's what you think you're supposed to do. Okay? So now is the time. Now is the time to take a deep breath. Now is the time to get ourselves in order, if you will. Now is the time to find the courage, to find the strength, to give to ourselves too, okay? And in giving to ourselves, we are helping our kids. We are being the example to our kids. And I'm going to talk, like I said, about this more in Wednesday's podcast. But it's important in this one too. And it's important in this one because I used to do the same thing where I used to look for all of the answers, how to help my kid, how to help my kid, how to help my kid, how to help my kid. The best way that I ever found to help my kid was to help myself. Because in helping myself, I build a firmer foundation for which to help them. When I am good, when I am stable, when I am happy, when I have energy, when I am filled up, I have more to give to everybody. When I learn to say no, I cannot right now. I need to do XYZ or ABC first. Instead of just draining myself completely and thinking, oh, I'll go to sleep and I'll wake up and all my spoons will be replenished. When the truth is, if you're borrowing from tomorrow's spoons, you don't really get those back. You borrow from them, you just show up tomorrow with less spoons. So there you go. There you have it. I'm Kimberly Cox. I'm so ridiculously grateful that you were here today, that you got to hang out with me and learn about the Parenting Unmasked podcast. And yes, we are going to get into unmasking. We're going to get into unmasking as parents. We're going to get into unmasking as kids and helping everybody to learn the balance of unmasking. Because unmasking is good, but masking can also be good at times. And I think there's usually like a thing where before we realize that we can unmask, we're like all the way masked all the time. And then we have this like switch that flips and it's, oh, I don't need to mask. I can just be myself. And then we go almost full force into the always unmasked. And we have to bring it back into the middle because there's a balance, right? There's times to unmask and there's times to be masked. There's times to pull it together and be productive and professional and all of that. And then there's times to just let our hair down, kick our shoes off. Let's have some fun. Let's be crazy. Let's be ourselves. And when we can do that ourselves, we're teaching our kids how to do that. And those are some of the most important elements of how they are going to be successful growing up, is if they can see how we do it. And then they can at least see that it can be done. Whether they follow in our exact footsteps or whether they figure it out on their own, trial and error. Again, trial and error is always a thing. So the more you get used to this idea of just, you will be playing trial and error forever. And when I was a new mom and I just wanted fixed, I wanted an answer, I wanted something that was just going to make this go away or make this better, I was so frustrated by all the trial and error that I had to do because I didn't have it in my head yet that this was something that could be lived with. It was, this is horrible. And if I have to live with this, if my kids have to live with this, it's going to be bad. So how do I fix it? Now I'm at the point where, how do I accommodate myself so that my light can shine? How do I help my kids accommodate themselves so their lights can shine, so they can be the best them and I can be the best me that we can be? And we don't have to worry about always fitting into those molds that don't work for us. All right, thank you for being here. If you guys got any value out of this, leave comments. Make sure you guys are subscribing. Please share this out. This is such a big desire in my heart to reach so many people because I was there. I was struggling. Some days I still struggle, but I have the tools and I know how to use them. Whether I have the energy to use them, not always the case, but I have the tools. I know where they're at. I know how to use them. So I want to help and equip and give everybody else these tools. I'm Kimberly Cox. This is the Unmasked Parenting Podcast. Thank you guys. Bye.